Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Cikgu Muhammad Azmi Abdul Hamid, President of MAPIM, our teacher, Yang Berhormat Tuan Haji Muhammad Sabu, Member of Parliament for Kota Raja and the former Defence Minister of Malaysia, most honourable ladies and gentlemen. I will try as a student of the Kashmiri history to enumerate several key issues and historical backgrounds that we see as the civil society of Malaysia. I would like to congratulate MAPIM and Shura for continuously highlighting the Kashmiri issue, which is close to our hearts, and congratulations for holding this event today, which is the Kashmir Black Day and the launching of the book, inshallah, after this. Ladies and gentlemen, I would just mention briefly in the next 10 to 12 minutes that we feel that self-determination is a key to resolving the Kashmiri stalemate. As a member of the Malaysian civil society, we have always had this feeling of a sad romanticism about Kashmir. It has been seen as a paradise on earth with the most beautiful looking people. I'm not from Kashmir. A place so beautiful and pristine, nestled in the parameters of the Himalaya with temperate climates, clear rivers and lush greenery. And yet, it is a nation occupied by India in defiance of the UN Security Council resolutions for the right of self-determination of the Kashmiris. And there are already 500,000 Indian troops in the militarized zone in the world controlling this piece of paradise populated by the Muslim majority. The recent abrogation of the Article 370 caught all of us by surprise. The sudden and unexpected by the Indian Parliament led by the BJP and Prime Minister Narendra Modi was a shock to all of us, including the civil society in Malaysia. And most of us, some of the major civil society organizations, including ABIB, MAPIM, and ACCIN, and others, were so enraged and demonstrated in Kuala Lumpur demanding for an immediate restoration of the Article 370. It was shocked because it was clear that any abrogation of these special conditions, rights of the Kashmiri people, can only be instituted by the tacit approval of the people in the form of a plebiscite. As I heard today, Prime Minister Imran Khan mentioning it. And Article 370 gives the Kashmiri the special rights of self-governance, land rights, immigration control, priority for civil service, and scholarship. The objective, in our view, of India's recent steps is very likely to transform its occupation of Kashmir into a permanent annexation to harm the identity of the Kashmiris, to reduce the majority of the Muslim population into a minority. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the worst form of imperialism. Let us be clear. I think Kashmir, it is very clear that Kashmir is not a land dispute between India and Pakistan. The issue is a question of self-determination of the people of the state of Jammu Kashmir, and it was part of the agenda during the partition of India. The issue is not bilateral, it's not an internal matter of India. It is an international issue and is on the agenda of the UN Security Council. As the UN continues to list Kashmir as a disputed territory, its resolution is important to global peace and security. And self-determination is celebrated in the UN Charter, in the International Covenant of the Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, and the United Nations General Assembly resolutions. Ladies and gentlemen, self-determination of Jammu and Kashmir, which was the second largest of the more than 560 princely states during the long years of the British rule. It was ruled non-democratically by the Maharaja Hari Singh until 1947, subject to the British control of the defences and foreign affairs, which means even during the British, Jammu and Kashmir was self-independent, or rather semi-independent. And with the death of Queen Rota Rani, if you go back to history, in 1339, the Hindu rule in Kashmir came to an end, and thus established the Muslim rule under Sultan Samsudin. YB, that's my father's name, but he's not the Sultan. And British paramountcy over Kashmir ended on the 15th of August 1947. On that day, only 3 princely states desisted from choosing accession to India or Pakistan. It was 3. They were Jammu and Kashmir, they were Hyderabad, and Junagadh. Under international law, all of them became independent on August 15, 1947. The question is, where does the sovereignty lie? Is it with the ruler or with the people of these 3 princely states? The Indian Prime Minister Nehru subscribed to these sentiments, and he declared that in cases where religion of a princely ruler was in variance with the religious creed of the majority, then the views of the majority people prevail in all matters of sovereignty. This was the Nehru doctrine that he put forward. And Nehru did not limit himself to rhetoric. He was reinforced by bayonets. In Hyderabad, the Muslim ruler has opted for the independence despite presiding over a predominantly Hindu population. The Prime Minister Nehru dispatched the military to ensure that the will of the Hindus to accede to India was honoured. A similar policy was adopted for Junagadh, where a Muslim ruler has chosen accession to Pakistan against the will of his largely Hindu population. So Kashmir was a corollary case of Hyderabad and Junagadh, where the majority Muslim population has been persecuted by a Maharaja for decades, before 1947. And this includes discriminatory law, state control of mosques, backbreaking taxation, deficient educational facilities, prohibition of arms of self-defense, and death penalty for slaughtering cows, and brutal suppression of peaceful political dissent. So, ladies and gentlemen, what was Nehru's deception? An indigenous revolt was in full swing on verge of toppling the Maharaja at the time when statehood arrived. Under the Nehru's doctrine, sovereignty over Kashmir instantly devolved on the people and not on the Maharaja. But Nehru cynically and opportunistically violated this doctrine. He schemed to forge an instrument of accession to India signed by the Maharaja, and then dispatched troops to Kashmir to prop up the collapsing regime. I think most of you are more well versed with this history. And of course, under Nehru's theory of sovereignty, the Maharaja lacked authority either to sign the accession document or to request Indian military intervention into Kashmir. Nehru felt initial guilt over his villainy and raced to the UN clamoring for a self-determination plebiscite for Kashmir to be conducted by the United Nations in a free and non-intimidating electoral atmosphere. The Security Council, with the express approval of both India and Pakistan, adopted twin resolutions on August 13, 1948 and January 5, 1949, mandating self-determination through a plebiscite in Kashmir after demilitarization of the territory. It was a decision by the United Nations in the form of a resolution. However, Nehru soon deceived by his delusion over Indian popularity in Kashmir when he recognized that the Kashmiris would never vote for accession to India. So the idea of the plebiscite was jettisoned. India contrived excuse after excuse for refusing to cooperate in holding the Kashmir plebiscite. Then in the 1950s, the Prime Minister Nehru dropped all pretense of complying with the Security Council mandates by unilaterally proclaiming that Kashmir has fallen into the Indian sovereign orbit. So ladies and gentlemen, the UN records of Kashmir as a disputed territory. Nothing much has changed since the Self-Determination Front. India has been insolently defying the UN Security Council plebiscite resolutions for more than 74 years, but the UN continues to list Kashmir as a disputed territory. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said about the situation in Kashmir on August 8, 2019, that, I quote, "The position of the United Nations on this region is governed by the Charter of the United Nations and applicable Security Council resolutions." The people of Kashmir are the stakeholders here, no one else. Many of the disputed territories around the world in the last century was resolved by self-determination through plebiscite. The people decided their future, and the examples are abundant. Sabah and Sarawak in Malaysia was through a referendum. Namibia, East Timor, Bosnia, Eritrea, Kosovo, Montenegro, and Southern Sudan. So the question is, why not Kashmir? So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, we need, I think, to pressure very much India with regards to the issue of Kashmir. Yeah? Sufficient pressure should be put on the occupying forces, India. Launching a global campaign to enforce a political and social boycott of India should be considered. This factor, ladies and gentlemen, played a key role in the liberation and to end racial discrimination in South Africa. The boycott, divestment, and sanction campaign against Israel, launched by the Palestinian Freedom Movement, has found considerable takers in the world. International bodies and countries should present the case of Kashmir legally in international institutions and international courts based on the UN resolution, reports of human rights institutions, and resolutions of the Security Council of the General Assembly. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, Kashmir is too important to international peace, security, and human rights to be left to either the ignorance of Amit Shah, the Home Minister, or the fanatical and whimsical ambition of Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India. With that, I thank you. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi.